Hello, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are
Hey,
listening to us from.
hey, Martin, how you doing? It's been a long
Hey,
time.
David. Yeah, I know. Been a while, mate. Been a while. So you're joining us on this intro. Well, not intro. Get started with Microsoft Fabric. So who are we? Well, who's that other guy that was just there with me? So I'm Martin Catherall. I'm a data platform consultant. I'm based in Australia. I've been with SQL Server and SSIS and all that for a very long time. And I've morphed into Azure over the last 8-10 years and Microsoft Fabric over the last 2. So who's my partner? Over to
And
you.
I'm David Alsamendi. Yeah, I'm David Alsamendi as well, data analytics consultant based in Australia. Are we in the same city, Martin, in Brisbane, Australia, East Coast?
Yeah.
Is that
And who have
right?
we got with us too, David?
Okay. We have a lot of help today. We have our moderators, Alpa and Warwick. They'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions as we go, use the chat and they are there to help us answering the difficult questions. So let me hand it over back to you, Martin, so you can tell us about the upcoming agenda.
Okay, so this is the first in a series of becoming a Fabric data engineer. So last week and a few weeks previously, we've been talking about progressing from DP-203 to DP-700. But this is a brand new series. Get certified, become a Fabric data engineer. Today is the first edition. Get started with data engineering on Microsoft Fabric. So over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks, we've got seven editions ranging from ingesting, real-time, data warehousing, CI/CD, which will be a great one, administration, governance, and then finally preparing you for the exam. So stay tuned and have a look for all of these. Just wanted to mention before we go on, for people around the world, mainly in the US, but wherever you are, the Microsoft Fabric Conference, FabCon, takes place in Las Vegas from March the 31st to April the 2nd. Should be a great event. I was there last year, managed to mix with the product team, the attendees, and other MVPs. It was fabulous. So if you're there, look out for me. I'd love to say hello. There's also a 50% discount voucher for the exam, DP-700. So take advantage of that. Go to the link you see on the screen. Just make a note of that. Yeah, you can schedule the exam. You can book it for, far out if you want, but schedule the exam, set yourself a goal and go for it. I'm sure you'll have lots of fun. So we're live and interactive. We just said, like, I'm Martin. David's introduced himself. We'll be going through the slides piece by piece. We got our moderators in the background. So it's all live and interactive for people who are joining us in the live stream, which is actually quite a few people. Obviously, this will be recorded and put on the channel. So let's get started with Microsoft Fabric. Over to you, David.
Wow, Microsoft Fabric, right? One more time. And this time, we're focusing on data engineering. So this is the episode 1 of the series. So we're going to set up the foundations today so you understand about the lakehouses and the warehouses and the different security levels and, some of the things about the pipelines and the real-time analytics. There are so many new concepts as part of Microsoft Fabric. And many of them you will learn as part of the series. Today in episode 1, we're going to focus a little bit on the foundations that you're going to need for the upcoming episodes. And remember, all this knowledge is going to help you achieve one of the new Microsoft certifications, the DP-700 certification that will certify that you are a data engineer within Microsoft Fabric. Martin, what can you tell us about the content within this certification?
Okay, so the content here is pretty in depth. It's similar to the DP-600 exam, but it's aimed at a slightly different audience. So the DP-600 exam was aimed at the data analysis, whereas this exam is aimed at the data engineer. So whereas like with 600, you might have seen a bit more content around Power BI and data analytics in general, this time you'll probably see more around the engineering side, maybe more of the real-time stuff, maybe more notebook code. But two different audiences. Obviously, there's a crossover between the two of them. So do you want to say any more about this slide, David, before we move on?
I think, look, we have an amazing breakdown of the different components that you will have as part of the exam. That's available in the Microsoft documentation as well. And you will see that Martin has all the skills in depth that he's going to share as well. But hey, Martin, let me ask you this question, okay? Do you like more being a data engineer or more being a data analyst?
Okay, so for me, really, I prefer being on the engineering side. A lot of firms nowadays like you to have a broad range of skills from like across this complete life cycle. But I've got to say, Power BI and visualization, I'm okay at it, but I'm not an expert. There's people who can make really great dashboards, and unfortunately, I'm not one of them. So to answer your question, David, I think more about engineering for me. What about yourself?
I have to say the same. You know, I love Power BI. I love the potential of the tool, but I like what happens under the hook. You know, I like moving data, data models, architecture, the same as you, Martin.
Yeah, me too. So nice one for that, David. So let's look at the skills in depth. So there's three main sections, and they're roughly weighted each about 35%. So we'll be managing the analytics solution, doing things like configuring Microsoft Fabric workspaces, workspaces similar to Power BI ones, implementing lifecycle management, orchestration, configuring security and governance, which is a big part. And then we're down to the, I don't know, what I might consider the main bit, but it's still 30%. So ingesting. And obviously, if you're going to ingest, you've got to design and then you've got to implement. And you might ingest with the batch data. So from a static data set, just bring it in periodically. Or there might be a real-time feed coming in, say, from electricity, utilities, or things like that. So really pay attention to that bit there. The streaming bit is probably not so common. It's becoming a lot more common. But yeah, do concentrate on that a little bit. And then we've got monitor and optimizing. So we had a complete program on this about a week or so ago. So if you're stuck, go look at that. Obviously, you want to monitor every single aspect of your analytics environment, not just your Fabric items, anything that relates to the whole solution, and identify and resolve any errors and optimize performance. So David, I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah, look, DP-700 is the new exam, is the new certification. Don't look after the DP-203 exam anymore. That's old. Okay, that exam is going to be the commission in March. So put all your effort in the DP-700 going forward in Microsoft Data Fabric and become a certified data engineer. But okay, let's stop talking about the certification, Martin. Can you run an intro of Microsoft Fabric?
Yeah, sure, of course I can, David. So now we understand what's included in the DP-700 exam. We're going to dive right into the content. We're going to start with a bit of like just level setting, and then we're going to move through all of various components. So in this section, we're going to discuss what Fabric is and why it's important. We're going to give an overview of some of the Fabric components and their architecture. Things like OneLake, which is a central component throughout the entire platform. And we want to emphasize what makes Fabric unique compared to other platforms. So here we can see a layout of all the components or the experiences that make up Microsoft Fabric. We've got Data Factory over on the left-hand side, which is basically, people have probably heard of Azure Data Factory and Synapse pipelines. So Azure Data Factory came into Synapse pipelines. It's more or less the same thing. Now it's coming to Microsoft Fabric. and it's still doing the same fundamental job. We can still use this to bring data from the source system and bring it into the Fabric environment. So many connectors to connect to data sources, whether they're common, SQL Server, Excel, or maybe they're not so common. Maybe you just got to connect to them with like REST APIs and things like that. So have a good look at that. And then we got data engineering. So data engineering can involve things like notebooks, writing Python code and Spark code, Spark SQL and Scala, and all those languages to move data around. We've got Lakehouses, which is very similar to a warehouse, and we'll get onto that shortly, where we can land data into a file section. So we can land any kind of files that we want into the file section of our Lakehouse, and then work on the transformations from there. And that's all accomplished with data engineering. And then we've got somewhere to store the data. So data warehouse is one of the places where we can store data. And people might be familiar with that from the SQL Server world, from building relational data warehouses, or maybe, you know, PDW or Synapse Analytics, kind of very similar concepts here to building that Kimball style or whatever style you want data warehouse. Then we got data science, the machine learning and the looking forward, trying to plan out what's happening and see what might happen in the future. And all that's pulling data from the same central location, which is OneLake. We got real-time analytics or real-time intelligence, as it says on the board there, where we can ingest data from a source that's basically just going all the time. So rather than pulling data from a static database or data frame or whatever it is, here the data would be coming at us real time. It would be an endless supply of data. And so we need a component to ingest that data, to maybe work on that data in real time, to maybe query it in real time, and have some sort of rolling window, look for anomalies and that type of thing. We can do a whole lot of things there. As well as examining that data, we might want to write it to a static place. That could be our data warehouse that we discussed a couple of minutes ago, or it could be just files on OneLake itself. The choice is really yours. There's quite a lot of choice that you have here with Microsoft Fabric. And then we got Power BI that probably a lot of people are already familiar with. But Power BI, interestingly enough, adds an additional storage component. So traditionally, we've had the import model and we've had the querying model where you can query different data sources. Here, we've also got a new one called Direct Lake, where you can actually directly query the data you've got in your OneLake. And so lots of different components here and lots of choice and things that we can do. And there you can see that OneLake underlies the complete platform. And that's the storage layer of Microsoft Fabric. So rather like a storage layer on your computer, it's where all your data is going to reside within, within OneLake. Obviously on your computer, it resides on your computer. But there are analogies there. So all of these components that you see, they can all talk to, they like to talk to a particular data format, and that's the Parquet, Delta Parquet format. That's on the OneLake storage layer. So that's OneLake. It's one copy. It's a key component, and it allows you to read data from a single copy without moving or duplicating that data. And as we get different workspaces, we can actually talk to data from the other workspace by using something called a shortcut. So the data appears to be in workspace A when it actually resides in workspace B. We'll talk about shortcuts in a little while because they can be used outside of OneLake as well, and even outside the Microsoft Cloud. So they are pretty good tools to work with. So automatically storing all your data in OneLake. OneLake itself builds on top of Azure Data Lake Gen 2. So anyone who's been familiar with Azure or might have come from the Synapse world, I'll be familiar with Azure Data Lake Gen 2. So there you build like hierarchical storage, and you can move data in and out of it. Very similar concept with OneLake, but you don't have all that messing around of configuring storage containers and that type of thing. So the Fabric platform is really a SaaS platform, whereas like the Synapse world was more of a platform as a service platform. So all data items are stored in the OneLake automatically, and the format that all of our components, all of our Fabric components like, is Delta Parquet. So the Delta Parquet format can be ingested or used by any of those components that we've seen. And so that is a really great format to have and to keep your data in. So everything's compatible with existing ADLS Gen 2 applications, including Databricks. And you can also have these things that I've just referred to as shortcuts, reference ADLS Gen 2 as well. So you might have data sitting out in your Azure storage that you've had for other things for many years. You don't have to necessarily copy it into Fabric, although that's an option if you want to do that. But you can actually make a shortcut to it so it appears in your workspace as though it were actually physically present in that workspace, whereas in fact it's actually being virtualized and it actually exists in the Azure Data Lake storage. So everything's accessible from OneLake. Every workspace appears as a container within the Azure storage layer itself. So if you were to drill down into the basically the storage components and connect to things with like Azure Data Explorer or Azure Storage Explorer, you'll see that they're all essentially storage containers under the covers. And then with Azure Databricks, we've got Unity Catalog integration, and that's in development at the moment. But like most features in Fabric, they're coming along and they're looking really great. So what's one of the big features for copying data from anywhere? So around here, we see what we call mirroring. And what is mirroring? So as well as using like Data Factory to pull data in from a static source, so you're copying it from one place to another, you can actually use this feature called mirroring, which is a similar concept, but it copies your data kind of in real time. So you might have, as a data store, an Azure SQL Server database, and you might want to mirror that into your storage OneLake. So you'd set mirroring up. You'd say, my Azure database is over here, my table is over here. That's the one that I want to mirror. And as data changed in that source system, it would be automatically pushed across to the OneLake storage. And so the data would be kept in sync in real time. And we can do that with many, many data sources. So we can do that with not only Azure DB, but we can do that with Cosmos DB, MongoDB, and there's a lot more data sources coming.
Excuse me, Martin.
Yes, David?
But how much time do I need to spend on building pipelines if I want to use mirroring?
Okay, that's a good point, David. That's a good question. So if you use mirroring, you don't have to build pipelines at all.
No pipelines?
No. You don't have to build any data pipelines at all. You can just go through a wizard and set your mirroring up. And once it's set up, you get a monitoring section where you can see the data come across in real time. Have you used mirroring yourself, David?
Not really, but I like wizards and witches, to be honest, Martin. That sounds good to me.
All right, cool. I'm going to wind this section up soon, and we'll be over to you to hear more about ingestion in a minute, David. And you can tell us all about pipelines and some other great features for ingesting data. So we can see there on the right-hand side, it talks about the Fabric compute engines. And we can see that different engines can use obviously different data. Sorry, not data. Different coding languages. We've got Spark, we've got T-SQL, we've got KQL, and we've got analysis services. So the language of analysis services, which of course Power BI knows and loves. And we got OneLake, and even within OneLake, we can talk to different clouds. We've got Dataverse there, which obviously exists in the Microsoft ecosystem, but we've also got Google and Amazon, which obviously sit outside that massive ecosystem. And we can use shortcuts to talk to that bit of data. So hopefully I've summed that up okay, David. Do you want to drill into those ingestion components, or, well, understanding managing the Fabric environment a little bit more?
Yeah, let me cover that quickly, Martin. Look, I know for many of you, there are a lot of buzzwords, but as you go through this series, you'll be more familiar with the different concepts and tools within Microsoft Fabric. Before we jump into how to use Microsoft Fabric, remember, as part of the DP-700 exam, you will have to learn how to manage your analytics solutions, how to configure workspaces, how to implement lifecycle, configure security, governance, orchestrate processes. So we have a lot of ground to cover, but there are a lot of professionals and MVPs that will help you going through that journey. As part of this section, we have to cover these essential Fabric concepts, okay? So this is really important because this is like a hierarchy. There's a tenant, only one tenant, okay? So when you go and create different Fabric capacities, you have to understand that belongs to a tenant. So the tenant will be, in many cases, your organization. And that's essentially attached as well to your Microsoft Intra configuration. So when you think of users and when you think of groups and security access and policies, all that belongs to the tenant. So there is a Fabric tenant, the same as your organizational tenant, only one. Within each tenant, you can go and set up multiple Microsoft Fabric capacities, okay? While there is only OneLake, as Martin mentioned, there could be multiple capacities. That gives you flexibility as well to isolate different workloads. So that means that the capacity is like the compute power that you're going to use to perform your workloads. So every time that you move data, or every time that you refresh a Power BI report, or somebody's querying a Power BI report, that is going to be taking advantage of the compute power / capacity units of your Microsoft Fabric capacity. So one tenant could have multiple Fabric capacities. You might have different capacities for different workloads, different departments, or different environments. Think of development, UAT, or production, or maybe some regulatory compliance. You might have to have a capacity in Europe, another one in the US, and another one in Australia. Now, then it comes the concepts of domains. A domain is essentially a group of workspaces that allow you to define an additional level of security as well. So you might have different workspaces that they contain marketing information, and you might want to group the security of those workspaces and the administration of those workspaces by using the domain marketing as an example. Within a workspace is where you're going to create the Fabric items. So when we talk about Lakehouses and data factory pipelines and Power BI reports and semantic models, all those Fabric items that are going to be hosted within a workspace. So now we have the two groups, right? So we have the Fabric capacities and we have the workspaces. So remember, the way that the capacities and the workspaces connect each other is by assigning a capacity to one or multiple workspaces. So when you go and create the Microsoft Fabric capacity, you will be able to assign that compute power to one or multiple workspaces as such. And when you think of workspaces, and this is quite familiar for if you've been working with Power BI. It is the same concept. We're talking about the same workspaces. So basically, those are logical containers that are going to facilitate not only the collaboration, but also to set up boundaries and a level of security for different departments, different needs, and different workloads. Also, when you think about lifecycle management, as you see here, and the integration within OneLake, as Martin mentioned before, that one workspace under the hook, it is like a container in OneLake. So you have to think what are the different use cases and how you're going to be using the workspaces within your organization. So yes, you need a strategy on how to use the workspaces. And in many cases, you might come up with the different approaches for different departments and different workloads. Let's have a quick look actually at the Fabric workspace. So as you can see in the number one on the screenshot, those are the different Microsoft Fabric items. You can see a list. In there we have different folders. Now you can create folders and group them logically, but you can also see that we have a Lakehouse and a semantic model and a SQL analytics endpoint. As part of this series, we're going to cover it, but it's important to understand that in many cases you might want to have the data movement objects in one workspace and the reporting objects in a different workspace, because that gives you more flexibility on how to manage access. The number 2 in the screenshot is going to allow you to create the Microsoft Fabric items. So if you want to create a warehouse, a lakehouse, data flows, you want to go through the wizard of mirroring that Martin mentioned before, you can do all that through the step number 2. Step number 3, you can see the small icons. You can see the diamond. So that basically highlights the license within your workspace. In this case, that's a workspace that is using a Fabric capacity. So if you didn't have a premium capacity, a Fabric capacity assigned to that workspace, that diamond that you see in number 3 will disappear. Number 4, of course, access. Access, and we highly recommend you to manage access through security groups in Microsoft Intra and not to assign access only to individuals directly. Try to manage always access through groups. And number 5 is workspace settings. Martin, let's drill down into workspace settings so we can see the different options.
Oh, okay.
All right. So you can see when you go to the workspace settings, you have the general, the license info is the most important one, because when you create a Fabric capacity in the Azure portal, in the license info option is where you are going to assign the capacity to the workspace. That's the game changer. And actually, you can switch Fabric capacities with almost zero downtime when the capacities are within the same region. You can also see the system storage, Git integration. This is quite amazing. I know that many of you've been asking for code version control for a long time. Now you can easily connect your Azure DevOps account or GitHub within the Git integration section. You see the OneLake, workspace identity, highly requested feature, network security to set up some private endpoints, and of course, monitoring at the workspace level.
That's fantastic, David. That's a great intro to workspaces.
There is so much in there and so many things that we have to learn for the exam. On top of that, okay, so you can see in this data security in Fabric, before we introduced the concept of tenants, domains, workspaces. What you have to remember is that you can assign access at different levels, okay? So that means that if you assign access at the domain level, a user will have access to see multiple workspaces and all the items within all those workspaces. But at the workspace level, remember that you have the Power BI roles, put it away, where you can define an admin, a member, a contributor, or a viewer. So those are the 4 levels of access that you have at the workspace level. But if you go one level down within the workspace, within the Microsoft Fabric items, you can also assign access to different Microsoft Fabric objects within the workspace. So that means that you can assign access to a specific table in the Lakehouse and OneLake. So you have a lot of controls that you can take advantage of to define the security and how people use the data within Microsoft Fabric.
Sounds pretty intuitive, David, and very similar to Power BI.
Exactly. I think the release of Microsoft Fabric items, Martin, it only helped us define an additional level of security for the different items. And as you can see in this slide, you also have continuous integration and continuous deployment within Microsoft Fabric. So what does it mean? So we talked about this before. You can go and integrate with Azure DevOps, Git, or GitHub. So that means that your code, the code of your solutions, is going to be stored in Git. But you can also take advantage of the deployment pipelines to release items across different environments. Let me give you an example. So you might define that you have an environment for development and an environment for user acceptance and another environment for production. And with CI/CD in Microsoft Fabric, natively, you can deploy items between the different environments without having to have developers who go there and manually release objects. So that allows us a lot of flexibility, but I think it put us in a position where we are really mature in regards to capabilities and avoiding problems in the production environment. So you have an out-of-the-box continuous integration and continuous deployment capability within Microsoft Fabric, which is quite amazing. You know, I've been using it quite a lot, and it just works. You know, it does the magic. You can deploy between environments without having to do it manually like in the old days. So, Martin, what about ingesting and storing data in Microsoft Fabric? Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure do, David. Thanks a lot for that. So obviously one of the main components of any data and analytics solution, no matter what it is actually getting the data into the environment, whether you're virtualizing the data or actually bringing it in. So let's have a bit more of a look at that. So we've got quite a lot of different options for bringing data in or just accessing data in the first place. We've got Dataflow Gen 2. So these really form a low-code, no-code environment. And I think these will be very, very familiar to people who've used Power BI Desktop before, who've ingested data using Power Query. So we're no longer using Power BI Desktop. What we are using is a version of Power Query that runs inside the browser. So it's one of the options within Microsoft Fabric itself to create a Dataflow Gen 2, and you'll be presented with a very familiar Power Query interface. And you could do all the things that you normally do in there, promote headers, get rid of columns, whatever you do. It's very, very similar. Similarly to that, we've got data factory pipelines. So a pipeline it basically comes from the Azure Data Factory world and the Synapse pipeline. So they took basically Azure Data Factory and brought it into Microsoft Fabric. So everything there runs on pipelines, and we have activities that run within those pipelines. So you may have, for example, an activity to copy data, and that copy data would need a source and it would need a destination. So you could, for example, pull data from an Azure SQL database, and you could output it as a Delta Parquet file where it would appear within your Lakehouse, as a table. So generally speaking, well, not generally speaking, they do. When you have Delta Parquet files on your Lakehouse, they will appear as just normal tables. But you can bring other data over with pipelines. Maybe you want to bring Excel over. And once your Excel file is in your Lakehouse, you might want to interrogate it further by pulling out different worksheets within the Excel file. So you're not stuck to any kind of file format you want. You can bring in any type of data, land it in your Lakehouse, and then manipulate it with Data Factory pipelines, or you could even use Data Factory Gen 2 to do the manipulation. So they are two really good tools to use, and very, very popular for bringing data into your systems. And then we got notebooks. So notebooks are generally used to transform the data. So once the data is landed, you have the option to use a notebook to transform that data. And the notebook is able to understand code from different languages. So you can use Python or PySpark and manipulate data with data frames, whether they're PySpark data frames or whether they are Spark SQL data frames. The choice is really yours. You can use Spark SQL itself. So rather like writing Transact SQL, which you would in SQL Server Management Studio, you can write Spark SQL within a Spark SQL cell of a notebook. And what makes the notebooks even better is you're not just stuck to one language within the notebook. You're stuck to one language within the cell, but throughout the notebooks, you can have many cells. And as the cells progress, you can change languages to whatever you like. You could even run, say, Spark SQL within your data frame code, within your Python code itself. So they are pretty phenomenal. Lots of crossovers with the data flows on the Data Factory pipelines. For example, I was manipulating a Excel file a little while ago, and I experimented between a Dataflow Gen 2 and a notebook using pandas in Python. Are both pretty much of a muchness. It just depends on maybe what you're familiar with, or maybe what your company has decided that they want to do. Then we got a big one that I've mentioned before. So we mentioned shortcuts, and shortcuts can be made to a lot of different systems. So the simplest one would be kind of within Fabric itself. So you could make a shortcut within workspaces. Well, sorry, crossing over workspaces. So rather than bringing data from workspace A into workspace B, where you're working, you could just make a shortcut to workspace A from workspace B and manipulate the data like that. So a shortcut, you might have heard that term before on your Windows desktop, where it's just pointing to a file on the file system. Here, the concept's very similar, except now it's pointing to data that lives somewhere else rather than in the workspace where you actually are. So some of the big methods here might include putting a shortcut to Azure Data Lake Gen 2, which you mentioned previously, or making a shortcut to Databricks, maybe on AWS or somewhere like that, or some of the other cloud vendors, or some of the other places, maybe on a computer or something like that, which you might need gateways for. Then we got mirroring. We spent a little bit of time talking about mirroring, so I won't kind of recap what I've already stated. Then we've got event streams, which basically handle real-time data. So as the data is coming in an endless stream, you're ingesting it with your components and putting it off to an event house through an event stream. And then we've got direct upload. So people are capable of directly uploading any kind of file they want to a Lakehouse and OneLake itself. So we've got pretty diverse storage options. We've got the Lakehouse, which we've talked about. We've got the data warehouse, which is akin to a Kimball-style warehouse that people create within database management systems. Now we've got in Fabric, Fabric SQL Data Warehouse. So we've always had Azure SQL, which is basically the next evolution of the on-prem database into the cloud. And now we've got that Azure SQL database has been brought into Fabric itself. So from within the Fabric SaaS platform, we can use a familiar SQL Server environment. And one of the use cases that I've used the SQL database for is to create what we call metadata pipelines. So creating a pipeline within Data Factory, and then maybe iterating through a table that contains a list of sources that we want to pull in. So really good for things like that. I'm sure lots of people use that for many, many different purposes. And then we've got the event house that I mentioned from the last slide, where we would ingest data from a real-time stream and land the data in an event house. So we're not grabbing it in our event house. We have a component to ingest it and a stream of data to stream the data into the event house. And you'll very often hear that called KQL. KQL is actually the language, it's Kusto query languages, but like people call databases SQL, people might refer to the event house as KQL as well. So what are the things you've got to kind of think about when you've got choosing an ingestion method? And I guess one of the big factors is what are you most familiar with? But also you've got to kind of consider the data types that are in the data. Are they coming from a nicely structured format? What are the data volumes that we've got to deal with? And how frequent is that data being ingested? Like we talked about real time, where we've effectively got an endless stream of data coming in. So the frequency is literally infinite. Or we could be dragging data across from a static source, maybe every day or every hour. We don't want to start the next ingestion while the first one's still working. So obviously that is a consideration as well. The developer persona and the skill set, are you more familiar with data flow Gen 2s, or are you more familiar with pipelines? What direction does your company want to go in? So all that skill set plays a big role as well. And, what are your needs? So your needs really tie into all the other considerations we've got there. Performance would be a big one. I mean, if you want to drag data in really quickly, you might look at your data source and think, maybe a data flow doesn't bring it in from that source as quickly as I'd like. Maybe I need to go to a data pipeline. Maybe I need to manipulate it with a notebook. The performance impacts there are really sort of case-by-case basis, and you need to basically look at what's going on there. And then the complexity of any data transformations. So generally speaking, our pattern is when we ingest data, we want to basically just bring it across verbatim from where it is in the source to land it in the destination. And once it's away from the source system, we can manipulate it as we're because we're no longer affecting the source system. So that's the general pattern that people use. And then we've got considerations for the Fabric data store. So very similar to what we had previously with the volumes, the types, and the personas. How does your organization treat data though? How is it being used? What are the read and write operations being implemented? And what security features do you want? All that is worth looking at. So taking the big picture into consideration. What sort of support you need? You've got to look at things like latency, performance, as we've said, and also the maintenance and the optimization of any pipelines or any features that are being used within the ecosystem. So hopefully that was a reasonable summary. And David, do you think you can talk about integrating some of our data sources in Fabric?
Yeah, Martin, let's talk about data ingestion and storage from an orchestration point of view, right? But before we move on, okay, I wanted to ask Martin, okay, you have to choose between one or the other one, or you can combine some of those data stores and data movement tools?
Oh, yeah, good point, David, good point. Well, you can actually combine. And one of the ways you can combine is with a pipeline. So a data pipeline can be used for all different types of orchestration. And so from a pipeline, you've got many activities that could say call a data flow Gen 2, or maybe call a notebook, or call a SQL store procedure. And so, yeah, good point, David. Good point. I'm glad you brought that up. You can call many methods there, yeah.
That's it. Look, when you talk about orchestration, right, when you want to, as an example, you want to extract data from a SQL server and you want to land it into OneLake, and then you want to perform some transformations. So the reality is that within the orchestration space and Microsoft Fabric, Data Factory is a great tool. So I like to say that Data Factory is a great tool for orchestration. You know, execute step 1, execute step number 2, and execute step number 3. So you can definitely do that with Data Factory, but it is not the other tool, the only tool that you have in Microsoft Fabric. You also have Data Flows Gen 2 with more than 300 connectors, and that is going to allow you to do a lot of transformations with low code. If you are familiar with Power Query, you will find this very intuitive. You'll be able to, remove duplicates, merge 2 different queries, everything just by dragging.
A lot of connectors, David.
Yeah, more than 300 connectors, right? I would say, look, if there's anything that you want to import within Microsoft Fabric, there is a tool that you can use in Fabric. You know, you can use pipelines, data flows, notebooks. There's an ODBC connector. You know, for those old 1980s relational database management systems, you can still extract information from those systems using Microsoft Fabric. Then let me quickly summarize this slide here. Okay, Data Factory is going to allow you to perform some copy activities, move some data, and orchestrate your data solution. I highly recommend having a look as well at the templates. So if you are getting started with Microsoft Data Factory, when you go and create a Data Factory, you can also use templates that are predefined data movement solutions. Data Flows Gen 2, they will allow you to, import data, transform data by using low code or no code, basically just with your mouse. You can perform, create data movement solutions. Those pipelines allow you to perform the orchestration. They also come with some activities. You have web activities, the copy activities. You can execute store procs. You can execute SQL queries, lookup activities. You can get information from REST APIs and so on. As Martin mentioned before, when you look at the notebooks, that's a world of opportunities, right? So that comes to whatever you want to achieve, you'll be able to achieve it with notebooks using different languages, combining them. You can add parameters within your notebook, and you can call the same notebook by passing different parameters, really useful. And of course, you also have the real-time analytics transformations that you can use. So all those components and the pipelines, they will allow you to do the traditional ETL process, extract, transform, and load. But you can also follow the approach of extract, load, and transform, the ELT process. Here in the screen, this is a sample of a Azure Data Factory pipeline. What you're seeing here is basically just 3 different steps. It's a really easy pipeline. The first step is going to copy some data from a source system into OneLake, or maybe you want to copy data within OneLake. The second step is going to always fail. As you can see, if the first step succeed, the second step is just one control. You can make your pipeline fail in different scenarios. And the third step that you see in there, we're executing a notebook. So that means that within the orchestration, you could be executing a copy activity of Data Factory, executing a mapping data flow Gen 2, and execute in a notebook as well. Let's have a quick look at the notebooks. So the notebooks as well, you can use Spark, SQL, Scala, Python, R, HTML for all the data orchestration and transformation, but it also comes with the machine learning and AI libraries from Spark and some enhancements from Microsoft. So remember, so notebooks are really powerful in regards to transformations and machine learning. I've seen many use cases where customers use the notebooks to drive all the transformations within their Microsoft Fabric environment. Remember that you also have the Transact SQL store procs within the warehouses, but I highly recommend having a look at the notebooks, because allows as well a different persona like data scientists to perform transformations and explorations. And this has been one of the key components as well, to complete the bigger picture. So if you want to do real-time analytics within Microsoft Fabric, now you have all the components and tools, the event stream, the event house, Costos, SQL, real-time dashboards, and Activator, everything with RTA, the real-time analytics solutions. You can do now real-time analytics solutions within Microsoft Fabric, stepping away of the traditional data warehousing solutions. We're covering a lot of ground, Martin. We're getting there almost to the end. Remember, this was episode 1, but I'd like to hand it over back to you, Martin, so you can share a few practical tips on the exam.
Yeah, that's cool. We will share a few practical tips on the exam. I just wanted to ask you there, David. I mean, we're both probably not the greatest at visualizations, but I see there you can create real-time dashboards within this within the KQL environment, within the real-time analytics environment. That looks quite interesting.
Yeah, and look, there's even like a walkthrough, right? So it doesn't require a lot of expertise for you to build those dashboards, right?
Oh, right. So, okay. Yeah. So one of the things I did with the real-time dashboards here. So I don't use real-time analytics very often. I have used it in the past, but there's some great skills on applied skills on the Microsoft Learn site that you can work through, and that will gain you some really good insight into how these things work. So, for example, if you want some experience of real-time analytics, but you don't do it very often, go look for the real-time analytics applied skill. That will actually generate a test for you that runs over like a 2-hour period. And it's like a hands-on test. So it'll set you various scenarios, and it will kind of guide you as well. So guide you through what you've got to do, but it'll also throw some challenges at you that you've got to solve yourself. And you'll do this within a VM. The environment's like quite set up well. And then you will walk through creating components, ingesting things, and then you get scored at the end. I mean, if you don't pass it, no big deal. You can do it again later on. There's actually no cost to it. Anyone can do it. Anyone can go onto the Microsoft site. I did a couple a while ago on things like Lakehouses and warehouses. All good things to learn. So I think they've got one of those for each of the basically components within Fabric themselves, and they're definitely good ways to get started. But like you were saying, David, you want a few practical tips, do you, for the DP-700 exam?
Yeah, and I think you just shared one that is practice, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess one of the main ways of learning things is to just dive in and do it. I guess one of the skills a data engineer needs to have nowadays is just the ability to learn quickly. And most people are pretty curious, and they want to know about new tech. And so diving into new areas like real-time analytics or Lakehouses or whatever it is. It's normally quite straightforward. A lot of these things are very intuitive, like, there's lots of help around within the Microsoft Learn ecosystem itself. We've got things like copilots. Now, we didn't really talk about copilots throughout this, David, but obviously, like a lot of Microsoft products, whatever they are, there's copilots built into a lot of this. So I've seen, people putting some basically PowerShell code in and saying, can you give me this as Python code? And it seems to do a great job. It's actually doing us out of a job, I think, David.
Yeah, that's so cool. And Martin, I think that you have to mention something, right? Because I remember in the old days, it was really difficult to get hands-on the technology, the new technology. Can people set up a free trial capacity to do their exercises?
Yeah, good point, David. Very good point. Yeah, people can set up their own capacity. Obviously you'll need your own email address, which can't be a Hotmail or a Gmail or one of the free addresses. You'll need your own domain, but you can go and set up a Fabric trial, and that Fabric trial will give you access to basically all the Fabric features. I believe there's probably some high-end features that you might not get access to, but essentially you'll get access to a large array of what's on offer. You'll also get a trial capacity. So David talked about capacities, and the capacities range from very cheap to very, very expensive. However, you get a trial capacity, which is equivalent to like an F64, which is very expensive. And you can have that to do whatever you like with for the next 60 days. So every single workspace that you create, you can just assign to this trial capacity. You can create as many workspaces as you like within reason. I think probably the limit's so big that it's probably not even worth talking about. But yeah, you can do that. Have you tried that, David?
I've used my trial capacity already, Martin. But every time, we're working with customers, I tell them, hey, go and give it a go. You don't have anything to lose. Give it a go, because the trial capacity might not be there in the future. Who knows?
Right. Okay. So I'm just saying there's been a lot of activity in the chat there, David, and I'm hoping we get some questions passed over in the last couple of minutes that we've got there. But just to recap on this slide, there's quite a few sample projects online, and quite a few sample resources that Microsoft have got themselves. For example, you might be wondering, I don't know of any real-time streams that I can use to set up my project. Well, Microsoft have got you covered there, because you can go set up your project and you can actually pick a real-time stream that actually exists already. I think they've got some about bikes, about bike shops. They've got some about taxis, and they've got some about weather. So all of those things, they provide, that infinite stream of data coming in, and you can, anyone can set that up and take advantage of it. And there are some practice tests on Microsoft Learn themselves. So they're kind of good to go take. But I think there's no substitute for practice and just a diversity of doing everything basically on that screen, from the hands-on practice, the study guides, the Microsoft Learn courses, and the sample projects. I've done many exams myself. I'm sure you've done a few, David. So how do you go prepping for these?
A lot of hands-on, 100%, and then, trying to understand how the test platform works. I think that's really important.
Oh yeah, too right it is. So let's move on with the just a closing slide, and we'll go to questions. So we've got some more programs coming up. We've got that Las Vegas solution of events coming up in the end of March, which will be pretty good. We've got the exam voucher, which we've got there. You can tune into that. And I'm just going to look if we've got any questions in the chat. We're talking about quite a bit there about about practicing for this exam, David. We got a bit carried away, or sorry, I got a bit carried away there.
Yeah. Look, this is what I did. I think, Martin, we covered a lot of ground. You know, the tips for the exam that are great. Let's see. There is a question. Okay, I'll read it. How come members at the same workspace cannot open and see each other's data flow and need to take over? But when it comes to notebooks, that doesn't happen.
Oh, okay. So, okay, that's a very specific question there. So generally speaking, there's security between the workspaces. So if you create your workspace, David, you obviously own it. You're the admin of it. And if I create my workspace, I'm the owner and I'm the admin of it. So by default, you can't see anything that I've got, and I can't see anything that you've got. Now, I can give you permission to see things on my side and do whatever you like, and you can give me permission to do things on your side. So the question seems to be asking about
the data flows. Yes.
Yeah, we cannot open each other's data flows. Fine, kind of totally understand that. But when it comes to notebooks, we can all open them. That's an interesting question.
Let me point it out, okay? I've seen this in the past. This is a known limitation, right? So right. If you, Martin, are working with a Dataflow Gen 2, I cannot open it until you close it. And this is a known behavior. You know, it's a modular experience. Only one developer can have a Dataflow Gen 2 open at one point in time, essentially. That will change in the future. You know, we don't have that challenge with the notebook, as it was mentioned, but it is what it is at the moment, I guess.
I've actually seen that now you come to mention it with the Dataflow Gen 2. Okay, so that's all we've really got time for. I think we should wrap it up, David, and say thank you very much for your time. Thanks for your time, David, on these slides. I think we've chatted over a few things during the last hour. And
yeah, look, it's been great to be with you, Martin, and thank you, Alpa and Warwick, as well, for looking at the chat. Looking forward to see what people do.
We'll see you later.
See you later.